Thank you so much, Carl, and thank you all for inviting me here today. I really appreciate both Wes and Rob's presentations. I think it provides a great setup for some of the things that I'm going to talk about, because I'm going to sort of dive like a little bit deeper into. So if we're concerned about the systems that connect people to work, and how do we now think about helping people get good skills and get good jobs, sort of what are our structures for doing that, and what are some of the things that we need to be attending to. Next slide, please. So because this is what I've been focused on for a very long time. So this is a very small sample of some of the publications I've worked on starting in 1992, that one in the upper left, when we didn't really have 4-color printing that much. So I guess what I want to say is that I think over this time, and maybe to one of the points that Rob was making in the close, I think we've learned a lot about how to design high quality training programs, but we really haven't institutionalized that. So I think there's a lot to draw on, but there's a number of challenges in sort of systemically getting there. Next slide, please. One of the things I'm particularly well known for is sector strategies. So I just thought I'd mention that here, because really what these strategies are sort of framing workforce development in the context of economic development, and trying to understand the dynamics of our particular industry sector. What is the strategy for building skills, and how do you understand what skills are actually needed? How do you make sure it's really a strategy that's meant to work within the dynamics of an industry and make sure that the benefits accrue to both the workers and the employer? So you're really kind of building this economic sustainability into the mix. Next slide. And we've seen that these, sort of in your very rigorous randomized controlled trial studies, we've seen that these kinds of strategies can have an impact, right? So we've seen that they can work and make a difference. They can help connect people to higher quality jobs, and really can be effective in sort of building the kinds of skills that companies need. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is they've also been really effective in sort of helping diversify good jobs, and addressing some of the equity concerns that many labor markets have. And I appreciate Wes's presentation for sort of highlighting a number of those equity concerns, because they are still with us and need continued attention. Next slide. But back to this question of, so we know what it takes to build high quality training, and it does, I feel like, although there's so many permutations and different institutional structures that are involved. Community colleges play a role, workforce boards play a role, nonprofits play a role, unions can play a role, business associations can play a role, a lot of different actors can play a role, but fundamentally it comes down to really having a high quality skill building strategy. How are you making sure somebody's building their individual capacities? How do they have that time and space in their lives to actually do the learning? So what are your system of social supports? UI is one good place to get the income support that people need, so that they have some time in their space in their lives to actually learn something. But you also need a system of sort of what I've termed sort of industry navigation strategies. Different industries have different cultures, different ways that you find employment, build professional networks, learn not just sort of how to do things, but sort of how to interact within sort of that particular industry. And it's really important to address those kinds of issues, so that when people learn the skills, they actually know how to connect to the people that want them and how to use them in that particular workplace. So when you figure out how to combine those things, and I heard somebody mention earlier, work-based learning. There's a lot of work-based learning, apprenticeship, those kinds of models are particularly good. There's a variety of things. There's different sort of applied learning strategies in other industries, but really kind of contextualizing the training for the occupations that you're planning for really helps strengthen these programs and make them more effective. Next slide, please. But here's the problem. And again, I'll go back to something that Rob mentioned on his slide. It's not cheap and we don't spend enough on it. So we spend less than other countries. What we've been spending has going down. And we kind of, I feel like it keeps sort of pointing fingers that somebody else should pay. So who should pay? Should it be federal? Should it be state? Should it be local? Should the businesses themselves pay? Should the workers pay? And we have systems to sort of, certainly the students pay a lot for college, and now we're having conversations about student debt. Businesses do invest through apprenticeships. But, I think we really need to think about sort of what is this shared investment and shared outcome model to build a more robust system. Next slide, please. But training doesn't solve the job quality problem. And we really need to not only think about sort of how do we move people out of bad jobs and into good jobs, but why are bad jobs so bad? And do they really need to be? Are they really going to be automated and go away? Or are there ways that we can redesign those jobs so that they're more productive and more rewarding? And these pictures come from a couple of from a program that I've worked with a lot that does training in sort of home health aid and these kinds of frontline health occupations. And, they are characterized by low wages, limited benefits, irregular hours, and pretty difficult working conditions, actually. So the woman there with the vest was trained and was good at this kind of work. But she left it, and she liked the work, but she left it because she got a job working for the transit authority that had livable wages, regular predictable schedule, good benefits. She could be a better mom. She didn't really want to do that work as much. She really liked caregiving. That was meaningful work for her. But that was the choice that she had in front of her. So I think we need to think both about how to move people out of jobs that are disappearing, but also how to redesign jobs that aren't disappearing and that we need done, but that are leaving people in really difficult circumstances. Next slide. So we really need to think about job quality. And what is job quality? So wages are our chief indicator. We have the best data on wages, and wages obviously are critical. That's most people in the country work for a living in paid employment, wage or salary employment. That is how the vast majority of households pay their bills. So sufficient earnings is obviously critical to a quality job. But there's a lot of other factors. There's schedules and how well you can sort of manage your time so it integrates with your life. There's the benefits. Again, in this country, we tie a lot of benefits to employment, healthcare, retirement, et cetera. There's a variety of things around working conditions, and certainly the pandemic highlighted the degree to which safe working conditions are an important part of a job, safe and healthy working conditions. And then there are things about the fact that we just spend a lot of time at work, and agency and respect, having some feeling of contribution of that your work is valued by the place that you work. These are things that we hear all the time. And there's others who've done job quality frameworks. They may look a little different. They may have 4 buckets. They may have 10 buckets, as Gallup does. But the content is basically the same. You get into this issues of pay, control over time, benefits, working conditions, but there's always this also some of these intangibles around agency and respect, quality supervision, and so on. Next slide, please. And so one of the ways to think about our labor market is this, and the job quality problem we have is our jobs actually, by our best indicator of job quality, which is, or most reliable, which is wages, are they sort of supporting people in the way that we want them to? So this slide here is an analysis we've been doing in different local labor markets, but this is national from 2018. And the size of the box relates to the size of the major occupational group, how many people are employed in it. And within that are the median annual earnings for that occupation. And the red line is a living wage drawn from MIT's living wage calculator for what it would take for a family. So here, what I'm using is for a family with 2 adults, 2 children, they would need a total of about $67,000 to live. So if each adult earns the $33,573, that would be a basic budget for that family, so that they would earn just enough to cover their expenses without relying on government subsidies. So you can see that over a third of jobs, over a third of those major occupational groups in general didn't pay enough to get above them, and about 2/3 in general did pay enough to get above that wage threshold. Next slide, please. But if you look at sort of how are we growing jobs, at that point, this wouldn't look very good. So because the lower wage jobs, the food prep, personal care, healthcare support occupations, and so on, were growing faster and adding more jobs than the ones above that line. Next slide, please. So in 2016, I did this, but I was too depressing because I used the living wage line for 1 working adult and 1 child. And so there you can see, if you're a single parent with 1 child, the number of jobs that pay enough for you to live independently and pay your bills on your own is only about a quarter of them were above that line. So that was too depressing. But next slide. You can go to the next slide, please. But there, at least the ones above that were growing slightly faster on that, but nonetheless, they're overwhelmed by the ones that are below that. So there's different ways you want to think about sufficiency. If you go to the next slide, please. So this is one we did for the Detroit metro area, and I think it is good to do it more towards the metro area, which is how we first started doing these. This is with 2019, looking at different thresholds for 1 adult, 1 child, 2 adults, 2 children, 1 adult living on their own, and the food prep and serving related occupations did not meet that threshold. So it's important to think about this labor market analysis and, is work working in the sense of providing the kind of living that we want it to provide? And one way of sort of addressing this challenge is sort of automating low wage jobs and trying to move people out of it. And another way is to think about, for jobs that aren't going to be automated anytime soon, how do we incentivize different kinds of business models that redesign those jobs to be more productive and be more rewarding? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So first, based on that, on some of these metrics, I think when you want to think about improving job quality, you do want to start to do that analysis and make some goals. We've done various things, and other people have done other kinds of things to try to say, well, what are some different sorts of things you might want to measure as you're trying to improve job quality? We launched a company called Working Metrics that just did some basic benchmarking of companies against their peers on sort of turnover rates, pay, disaggregating pay by race, gender, and ethnicity, internal advancement, and so on, and trying to see, so this could be a way to sort of just understand which companies in your labor markets are the better companies in terms of their industry, because there are differences within industry. Then you could also think about, we wrote this paper shortly after the Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act passed, to say, how do you want to think about employer engagement and what's the benefit of that? And sort of, again, sort of thinking about how do you measure sort of employer engagement outcomes in ways that sort of look at both job quality improvements as well as sort of whether companies are getting what they want out of the workforce system. Next slide, please. Because employers do have choices in job design. And I think it's, so I'll just cite one example from here, Quick Trip, that we've done some work with them. And, it's a gas station convenience store chain, but they are very profitable. They have good profitability per square foot and sort of compare quite favorably to companies in their sort of peer companies in their industry. And they design jobs for things like cross training, profit sharing, a variety of sort of team strategies. They really design jobs for productivity and to be higher quality jobs, to build their retention. They expand the company when they're sort of developing people to be ready to run stores in other locations. So there's a variety of ways that they think about sort of their workers as assets rather than their workers as an expense. Next slide, please. And this is a way of thinking that can be encouraged. So we worked with the Illinois Manufacturing Excellence Center. We did an evaluation of their new strategy to think about. So they are a manufacturing extension partnership sort of out of the Department of Commerce, and they have the state of Illinois contract to do that work. And they really invested in a new way of working with companies to have them think about the strategic investment in their workers as part of driving productivity. Next slide, please. And this is just illustrative of the outcomes that we documented in that evaluation of their work in terms of both better business outcomes and better worker outcomes. Next slide, please. Another strategy to think about is encouraging employee ownership. We've seen in a variety of our work that employee ownership can contribute to improved job quality. And there's also an important opportunity to contribute to improved equity. Wes mentioned earlier the racial wealth gap. And one of the great things about employee ownership is that it helps build ownership of business assets. Ownership of business assets is a key avenue to improving wealth. But we see employee-owned companies have a variety of benefits in terms of job quality, in terms of they tend to have higher wages, and also some of the intangibles in terms of engagement at work. Next slide, please. There's a variety of community institutions that can contribute to job quality. So there's a variety of ways that workforce development and community colleges can contribute to job quality. Interestingly, I work with a community college that was starting to think about their own role as a major employer and how they can improve the quality of jobs in their community college, and was building an apprenticeship for building internally their own IT departments. So, but these institutions often, sort of work with public agencies, and there's a variety of ways they can contribute to job quality. Next slide, please. We've done a lot of work to survey these organizations and find out exactly how they approach building job quality. And we've developed a job quality tools library and also shared some of the results of the survey in a recent publication. But this job quality tools library has a number of things that a range of organizations can use to understand more about job quality, some of the frameworks people use, how to set some measures, and then what are some tools that different kinds of organizations ranging from workforce to community finance to others can use. Next slide, please. Too often, I think in our conversations, especially, I'm thinking about from the recovery from the Great Recession, we really wanted to just kind of get people into jobs, and we wanted to stabilize companies, and we didn't really think, it was sort of like, we couldn't really talk about job quality because we just had to get people into jobs. And it was like, there's this trade-off between company success and worker economic stability. But I think go ahead, you can, this is my little bit of, we need to stop doing that. Next slide, please. We really need to think about, how do you have some basic economic stability? One of the things, because I've spent so much time with so many of these job training programs, is people need to work when they're in these job training programs, and the more they need to work, the less that they can spend time learning. And the more their work doesn't give them sort of economic stability, the more their opportunities to learn and advance are constrained. So we really need to figure out how we have a baseline of economic stability so that people can pursue mobility. Next slide, please. In this publication, we really just outlined sort of a range of policies. They're sort of the ones people think about for improving job quality. You can raise minimum wage or things like that. But I think there's other things to think about, like using procurement and sort of benchmarking companies and considering when we're spending public dollars, are we really kind of getting the most public benefit from the companies that we work with? So you can look for the companies that have higher job quality, who are often also more reliable because they have a more stable workforce. So there's a variety of policies that we discuss in here in terms of how to incentivize better job quality. Next slide, please. And that's I think basically where I want to end. Thank you.